I don't believe RF Kennedy Jr. is lying. I think this is what he was told and this is what he believed. But I can tell you emphatically that Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger. He was involved with the mafia. He was tied up with Frank Costello. As a matter of fact, there was a point in time when Frank Costello wanted to kill him. I heard it from different sources at different times. They weren't together. I had discussions with my father about it, who was around and was in the know. He was the underboss of the Colombo family at that time. He had no reason to make it up. My dad wasn't personally involved in this, but sure, he knew about it. Everything in the world is corrupt. Every agency on the face of the earth. The most corrupt agencies, institutions in the world are governments. Going back to the days prior to the Roman Empire, they're always corrupt. They're always in need of reform. They're the biggest agencies around, and there's corruption in all of them. We're seeing it now. The fraud, the abuse, we're seeing it. We've witnessed it. We know it. So why is it so far-fetched to believe that a government agency like the CIA, who hated these people, wouldn't be involved in the assassination? Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. All is very good, very blessed on this end, my friends. And as always, I give all the praise, honor, glory, and thanksgiving to our God for that. I was just watching an interview with RFK Jr. that he had with Vlad from VladTV. I'm sure many of you know who Vlad is. I've appeared on his podcast many times. Good guy. And he had a pretty lengthy interview with RFK, really about his life story. And a lot of things came out in that interview about the JFK assassination, about his grandfather, obviously about his father, Robert Kennedy's assassination. And some of the things that he talked about, I want to react to because those that involve the JFK assassination, I think that he's been a little bit misled on, I would say. And I want to make this clear. I happen to like RFK Jr. very much. I think he's in a much needed position, making America healthy again. I think he's going to do a great job there. He wants to make our kids healthy. He wants to make all of us healthy. And we need him because there's a lot of obesity in this country. We're eating a lot of things we shouldn't be eating. And, he's got a really important job in my view. So I like him. I want you to understand that. So we're going to get into it. I took some notes and I'm going to respond to some of the things that he said, in particular about his grandfather, about the JFK assassination, and maybe I'll mention a little bit about his dad's assassination. So let's get into this interview a bit, and I really encourage you to watch it. It was a good interview. But let's get in specifically about some of the things he said, and I'm going to respond to it. And this is RFK Jr. denies the bootlegging allegations against his grandfather, Joseph Kennedy. Obviously, I have something to say about this. My friends, I know something about having power. Whether it's on the streets or in the media, it's all about who controls the narrative. And right now, the mainstream media is trying to control yours whether you realize it or not. I've been using this platform called Ground News, and it's completely changed how I look at the news. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Remember the Hunter Biden pardon story? How can we forget it? It was everywhere. Well, over 1,000 news sources covered that same story, but watch what happens when we compare headlines from the different outlets. You see how each one spins it differently? That's what makes Ground News different. They're the only platform that lets you see exactly how the media machine works, and yes, it is a machine. They break down the political bias of every source, they show you which stories are being buried by different sides, and this is crucial. They expose who actually owns these news organizations, and that makes a difference, a big difference in how it's reported. In today's world, you can't afford to be in the dark. Ground News gives you something invaluable, and that is the ability to see through the smoke and mirrors and the gaslighting of mainstream media. Right now, you can get the same tools I use for half price. Just go to ground.news/MF or scan this QR code where you'll get 40% off their premium Vantage plan. Come on, that's less than a cup of coffee for the same tools I use to stay informed. You know, with everything that's happening in our country right now, so much going on, you need to see the full picture, not just what they want you to see. So don't wait on this. Take control of your information today. You want to be in the know the right way? Get to Ground News. It's an offer that you shouldn't refuse.
Address this rumor because, from what I understand, it's not true, but there was always the rumor that he was involved in liquor bootlegging.
And
Liquor bootlegging.
yeah, he was not. My grandfather went through 3 presidential appointments, including the head of the SEC, he had a high job up in the shipbuilding for the United States Navy, and he was the ambassador to the Court of St. James to England. He had to go through Senate hearings in each one. If he had had anything to do with the liquor industry or with prohibition, he had so many political enemies, and that would have come out.
The grandfather was the bootlegger who worked with the mafia, and then the mafia helped John F. Kennedy become president. And then when Bobby went after the mafia, they felt betrayed, so they killed John F. Kennedy and so forth.
Yeah, and
You've heard this a million times.
I've heard it a million times, and they knew it was coming. So he went over to Scotland and he bought Pinch vodka, or Pinch whiskey, which was one of the premier whiskey companies.
Mm-hmm.
He did it with James Roosevelt, who was the president's son.
Okay.
The two of them bought it, and then they imported to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much, but a lot of the stuff. So it was at warehouses right next to the U.S. border. So the second that prohibition ended, all the liquor came. Now, he was never accused of being a bootlegger until after he had his stroke and couldn't defend himself, and my uncle was killed.
Uh-huh.
It was 1964. At that point, the CIA was trying to, let's say, disparage the rumors that they may have had something to do with President Kennedy's assassination. There was a big effort that was run by an individual in the CIA who had been the New York Times bureau chief in Havana. And his job for the next 30 years was blackening the Kennedy name. And that is one of the rumors that he started.
Now, I'm going to say this. I don't believe RF Kennedy Jr. is lying. I think this is what he was told and this is what he believed. He was a youngster. He wasn't around really during that time. But I can tell you emphatically that Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger. He was involved with the mafia. He was tied up with Frank Costello. As a matter of fact, there was a point in time when Frank Costello wanted to kill him. I heard this on very good authority. And again, people of substance in that life, they don't make things up. They don't say these things just to say them. When they talked, and I heard the things that I heard about the JFK assassination, it was from prominent people in that life, not people that are just walking around the street, trying to throw their chest out and be important. These were prominent people that were in some way involved, with these happenings. So I'm speaking from authority in that regard. No, I wasn't there. No, I don't have firsthand knowledge. But I have knowledge from people who had firsthand knowledge, and I don't think they had any reason to lie to me. I heard it from different sources at different times. They weren't together. I had discussions with my father about it, who was around and was in the know. He was the underboss of the Colombo family at that time, and he had no reason to make it up. My dad wasn't personally involved in this, but sure, he knew about it. And let me go on and tell you a couple of things that I know. And before I get into that, I hope you're noticing this great 3/4 zip that I have on. My daughter Julia, a little history, and her fiance Tyler came to me and said, "Dad, we want to create a line of clothing for you, a wardrobe." I said, "Okay, go out and do it," right? So they know what I like to wear, and they know I like to be comfortable. And so they created this 3/4 zip, and it's really cool. They got it in black and white. It's got my monogram on it. It actually has one of my favorite Bible verses, one that's very meaningful to me, Proverbs 16:7. Many of you know I have that tattooed on my arm. And then they have the Made Man monogram right here on the sleeve. And really cool. The material is great, good quality, so I love it. And yes, they will be made available, so watch coming soon. She wanted to make sure that I liked it, and I really do. I know if my daughter's going to design something for me, I'm going to love it. She knows my taste. So really excited about it. Hope you like it. About Joe Kennedy and his mob connections. Multiple historians document Joe Kennedy's involvement with bootlegging during Prohibition, contrary to RFK Jr.'s denials. These are factual statements. They documented it. And the fact that he went over to Scotland after Prohibition was repealed and bought a liquor company, well, why did he do that? Just out of nowhere? No, because he had experience as a bootlegger during Prohibition. He made a tremendous amount of money. He was involved with the mob, because you really couldn't be a bootlegger unless you were involved with the mob. That was it back then. We were the bank. Do you know that there were something like 36,000 speakeasies in the state of New York alone? That's how popular liquor has been, and that's how much money was earned during Prohibition. I've said this 1,000 times, I'll say it again. It was Prohibition, the federal government, that made Cosa Nostra Mafia strong in this country. No doubt about it. They made hundreds of millions of dollars that would translate into billions of dollars in today's economy. Let me continue. Kennedy maintained relationships with Frank Costello. I know that for a fact. I've heard it so many times. Meyer Lansky and other prominent mob figures. Again, this is documented, not only coming from my mouth. FBI records indicate Kennedy used mob-connected individuals to distribute liquor in the Northeast Corridor. He had to use mob-connected individuals. It's like I said about the construction companies in New York during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They had to, in some way, be involved with the mob because we controlled the unions, so they had to use us. They weren't in bed with us, but they had to be involved with us in order to get anything done. You wanted a building to be built, you had to be involved with us because we controlled the unions. Very simple. Kennedy's Somerset Importers Company was established suspiciously quickly after Prohibition ended, suggesting pre-existing infrastructure, exactly what I just said. He didn't all of a sudden say, hey, I'm going to buy a whiskey company. He did it because he was involved in Prohibition. And like I said, I heard that Frank Costello was so upset with him at one time, wanted to kill him. They told him to back off because of his connections, his political connections, and they said he might come in handy someday. And obviously, that was the thought, and he did. Business dealings of Joe Kennedy. Joe Kennedy's acquisition of liquor distribution rights occurred before legal repeal was finalized, indicating insider connections, of course. Kennedy's real estate and entertainment industry ventures repeatedly intersected with known mob-controlled business. And again, this is documented. This is something I'm reading that was documented. Kennedy's banking operations in the 1920s involved several individuals later implicated in money laundering schemes. Now remember this when we get to the JFK assassination. Remember how hooked up Joe Kennedy was during Prohibition with the mob. Multiple associates from Kennedy's earlier career had documented ties to organized crime families. He was involved, no question about it. He was from Massachusetts, Boston, Northeast, mob-controlled areas. We know that. Political leverage. Kennedy reportedly used mob connections to secure political advantages throughout his career, one of them being his son, John Kennedy, elected as president of the United States. We're going to get into that. And let me tell you, at that same time, I told you this, Nancy Pelosi, her father was absolutely mobbed up. He became the mayor of Baltimore due to his mob connections. We put him in office. When I say we, my former associates. No doubt about it. That's why Nancy Pelosi thinks she's a mobster. That's why she talks that way. She acts that way. That's why she thought it was okay to bilk, American citizens with her insider trading schemes. That's why she used her office to become a multi-millionaire. No doubt about it. So when these people try to, we had nothing to do with the mob, we did. And I want to tell you something. When I talk about mob, relationship in this country, you got to understand, the mafia is part of history in this country. Look at how deeply involved they were with major figures, deeply involved. And we're going to get into that even further. So when people say, oh, Michael, you talk about the mob, that was your former life. It's part of history. It really is. All these people that are on this tapestry behind me, part of history. Well-known part of history. They infiltrated various businesses, political connections. They were part of history. They had an impact on the American way of life, no doubt about it. Kennedy's ambassador's appointment coincided with significant donations from businesses with known organized crime ties, including the Teamsters Union. Several Kennedy family properties were purchased through intermediaries connected to organized crime figures. And Kennedy maintained communication with mob-affiliated union leaders throughout his business career. No question about it. He was in the real estate business. You had to be involved with the mob. So for people to say he never was, not true. And let me tell you something. RFK may be saying this innocently. Maybe this is the information that was given to him. I'm not saying he's lying about it. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not suggesting that. This is what I believe he believes. And he was told these things, but it's not true. So, I have to state what I know to be the truth. RFK Jr. refutes the claim that the Chicago Mafia helped JFK win his presidency and was later betrayed when RFK cracked down on organized crime. I've said this many times. I'm going to repeat it again. I said it on Piers Morgan. I said it on my own platform. There's no question that we were involved. When I say we, my former associates, Mafia, Cosa Nostra, was involved in the JFK assassination. I'm going to get into it. This is what RFK said during this interview. Quote, "The rumor was always the grandfather was the bootlegger who worked with the Mafia, and the Mafia helped John F. Kennedy become president. And then when Bobby, his dad, went after the Mafia, they felt betrayed, so they killed John F. Kennedy." Something like that. I'm not saying they killed John F. Kennedy. What I am saying is they were involved in an assassination of John F. Kennedy. And I'm going to get into that and prove it more. Now, what he's saying happens to be true. Happens to be true. People were very upset because Joe Kennedy came to his mob-connected people in Illinois and said, we need the state of Illinois, we need the city of Chicago in order for JFK to become president. He was in a very, very tight race with Richard Nixon at that time, and Illinois was needed. So they went to us guys, and we pulled it off for them. And the agreement is that the Department of Justice would back off the Mafia because they were starting to really get heated. And the agreement was they would back off. They were really going after the mob. And remember this, until Robert F. Kennedy really started to go after organized crime, J. Edgar Hoover would never even admit that the Mafia existed because we had stuff on him. We had him. And he wouldn't even admit it. Until Appalachia, he refused to admit it, but then he had to admit it.
Everybody and there's a lot of writers out there who would have liked to find some evidence. There's a guy called David Horowitz who spent years looking for that evidence and finally said, yeah, it's not there. It didn't happen.
RFK is being misled here. There was a lot of people that did say that the mob was connected in this. There's no question about it. I've said this all the time. I don't believe that the Department of Justice, that the government wants anybody in the world to believe that the Mafia was able to get to a sitting president. I've said that. That's why the Warren Commission report was nonsense. We're seeing that now. And as more of these confidential, classified documents come out, we're going to see that the Warren Commission was totally whitewashed and not true. There was more than one shooter. I think we know that already. And they just tried to cover this all up. So let me keep going.
1959, I went to, and there's pictures of me sitting in the Senate hearing room on my mother's lap in the front row. My father eviscerated Sam Giancana.
Absolutely true. No question about that.
So Sam Giancana, I think, took the fifth 50 times in front of my father. My father ridiculed him. My father asked him, do you hang people who cross you from meat hooks? Have you done that? He giggled, and my father said, you're giggling like a little girl, aren't you?
That's what Robert F. Kennedy said to Sam Giancana, who was a big shot, big mob guy in Chicago, as many of you know. He was later killed. He was murdered, but he was a big guy at that time, and he was intimately involved in the assassination of JFK.
With Sam Giancana, who he ridiculed, who he's putting in jail, who he's attacked for years, and they make up, and Sam Giancana gives my uncle the White House. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, he didn't cut a deal with Giancana. There's no question about it. RFK Sr. didn't know anything about this. He wouldn't have agreed to have his father, have his brother assassinated. Of course not. He didn't cut any deals with Giancana. Not saying that he did. As a matter of fact, to his detriment, to his brother's detriment, he didn't. And that's the problem here.
And they make up, and Sam Giancana gives my uncle the White House. It doesn't make any sense.
Yes, it does. And I'm going to show you why in a minute.
Kind of another rumor that was circulating at the time was that my uncle won the presidency by conniving with Mayor Daley to fix the Chicago vote. Well, Mayor Daley fixed the Chicago vote for the lower ballot candidates all the time, so nobody disagrees with that. The problem with this is that after that vote, first of all, after the vote, Mayor Daley was so outraged about these accusations that my uncle had won unfairly that he offered to do a recount and pay for it himself. He also, even if my uncle had lost Illinois, he would have still won the presidency.
I don't believe that's true. And even if it is true, at that time, when they came to us to help them win Illinois, maybe they weren't sure of that. Maybe they weren't, but they wanted Illinois. It was a battleground state, and they needed that state, and they came to us. And everybody knows Major Daley was corrupt. He was involved with us then. Everybody. Chicago was one of the most corrupt cities as far as mob involvement with politics in the whole country, without a doubt. Chicago, New York, New Orleans with Carlos Marcellos, without a doubt. We had tremendous influence there. Kansas City, Cleveland, tremendous influence that we had there. So, you know, he's being misled in this regard. And I'm saying this, he might totally believe this. Maybe if I sat down with him and gave him some more information, he would change his opinion.
At that time, he felt like it was the gravest threat to American democracy because the mafia had infiltrated all of these institutions that were key to our democracy, including the labor unions, but also the judiciary. They controlled a lot of judges. They owned a lot of Congress people. And he felt like it was a threat to democracy and ultimately the republic.
Absolutely true. He's confirming what I said. The mob in this country, the mafia, had a big impact on American culture, on American history. They're part of the history. We can't deny it. It is what it is. There's the Attorney General of the United States. His son is quoting his father. The Attorney General has said it. This is the kind of impact and influence we had in this country back during that time, during the golden era of organized crime mafia in this country.
And Hoffa hired people to kill my father.
Really?
Yeah, he hired a guy to shoot him in the swimming pool because my father swam every morning, and he hired and to firebomb our house.
Absolutely true. This did happen. Jimmy Hoffa hated RFK because he went after him. He wanted to get him out of the Union, and he eventually did. As a matter of fact, it later on led to Hoffa's death because when he was released from prison and wanted to get back into the Union and was told not to, we know what happened then. Disappeared.
But it was surrounded by roads and almost a square of roads. And those roads, all day long, there would be trucks going around our place, blowing their horns from the Teamsters Union.
Yes, because they were very, very upset. Why? Because RFK Jr. was going after their president, Jimmy Hoffa. All this is true. Now, let me put this together. When the CIA, if it was that branch of the government or whatever other government agency official came to the mafia and they wanted to assassinate JFK for whatever reason they had, we know about the Cuban Missile Crisis. We know that John F. Kennedy Jr. did not like the CIA. We know that he did not like the Secret Service. He said bad things about them. And they, in turn, didn't like him. They didn't like him at all. There was a lot of friction between JFK and the CIA and the Secret Service. They didn't like him. As a matter of fact, I heard this, and I believe it to be true. The Secret Service, on the day that JFK was shot, was at minimal enforcement during that day, minimal security. The same thing that happened with Donald Trump the day he was almost assassinated. Minimal security by the Secret Service. Is that a coincidence, or is that by design? Just roll that around in your head for a minute. Same thing happened with Trump. Minimal security on the day that he was almost assassinated in Butler, Pennsylvania. Same thing with JFK. Fact. There was lax security by the Secret Service who didn't like JFK at that time.
And my father asked McComb during that conversation, did the CIA do this to my brother?
Now, why would he ask? Because JFK didn't like the CIA. They, in turn, didn't like him. It's starting to come together.
The Warren Commission said that Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone shooter and nothing about Lee Harvey Oswald's life or the evidence. There was so much evidence, even at that time, when it was just a tip of the iceberg, that could not have possibly been true.
Well, I think we know that by now. You know, the fact that, again, you know, when JFK was in the car, this is minimal evidence, there's more, was allegedly shot from behind by Oswald. Well, when you look at the video, what happened? Boom, and he went back this way. Why would he be going back if he got shot in the back of the head? He would have slumped forward. That's minimal evidence. There's a lot more, a lot more. And by the way, I've said this once before, you know, JFK's brain was lost. It was in the National Archives, and now it's lost. How do you lose the brain of the President of the United States that's in the National Archives? You don't lose it. You don't lose it. Somebody took it out of there and got rid of it for whatever reason. What further evidence was in that brain? If somebody wanted to look at it later on, because people were really starting to doubt the Warren Commission's report, and maybe they would said, you know what, we got to take another look at this. So rather than allowing that to happen, his brain was lost. Give me a break. That brain was removed.
He had never said anything nice about Jackie and his wife. He worked for the mafia. He ran a strip club that had what they call B girls, which were girls that would change, you know, every 2 weeks or months, and a new group would be brought in. And those girls went to these B clubs all over the country, all over the Southwest, and they were part of a, you know, stable. That was part of Carlos Marcello's organization.
Right on, and I'm going to get to further factual information about that. 100% right. He was totally mobbed up, Jack Ruby. Jewish guy, Rubenstein his name was, totally mobbed up, going back to the days of Capone. Absolutely.
I would say there's so much evidence that it is that of CIA involvement, not only with my uncle's murder, but then with the, you know, the 60-year cover-up.
60-year cover-up, CIA. Let's put this together. We know for a fact that the CIA went to Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky during World War II. They needed help to get Allied troops into Sicily. Luciano made a deal through Meyer Lansky with them. This is fact. It's been reported many, many times and documented that if he were to get overturn his sentence or allowed to leave prison, and he was already deported at that point, be allowed to come back to America through Cuba, that he would make it safe for the Allied forces to land in Sicily. That's exactly what happened. The CIA came to the mob for that help. They also came to Luciano and Meyer Lansky for help at the ports. We control the ports, and they needed things to be brought in and brought out. And they came to us, and we opened the ports for them. Fact, CIA involvement with the mob. Number two, when Castro, the revolution, very upset here. We didn't want communism in Cuba. So what happened again? CIA, they came to us again. And they had a plot that they devised to poison Castro. We were involved with that. Fact, 100%, no doubt about it. They came to us twice. You got to understand this. CIA will deal with the devil to get their biddings done. They didn't care it was us. Deal with the devil. So they came to us twice before. Law enforcement, in another time, came to a friend of mine, a made guy along with me in the Colombo family, Greg Scarpa, to go down on a civil rights issue, to go in and to get some Ku Klux Klan people to admit to a lynching with 4 black guys, I believe, that were killed. Fact. So the law enforcement came to us, CIA came to us, government came to us. So the fact that the CIA, according to RFK Jr., and RFK had that suspicion, came to the mob to help in an assassination plot is not in any way out of the ordinary. This is what they do. He's confirming this. He doesn't realize it, but he's confirming it. Let's get into now Jack Ruby. The Warren Commission, many people said Jack Ruby had no mob connections. He was just a patriot that wanted to kill Oswald. Absolute nonsense. It's so ridiculous, it makes no sense whatsoever. Let me give you a little background on Ruby. In his Dallas operations, Ruby operated multiple nightclubs serving as fronts for gambling operations run by Chicago and Dallas crime families. No doubt about it. And this isn't coming from me. This is documented. This is not what I knew, and I'll tell you from my independent sources what I knew. Ruby's Carousel Club, that was the name of his strip club, was documented as a meeting point for local organized crime figures. No doubt about it. That area was controlled by Carlos Marcello, who was the boss of New Orleans, Louisiana. Quote, Ruby served as an enforcer collecting gambling debts for Chicago mobsters, operating in Dallas. Absolutely, 100%. He was under Ricardo, no doubt about it. He started with Capone. Police records show Ruby was arrested multiple times for weapons violations and assault charges related to protection rackets. Let me continue. His mob relationships. Ruby maintained direct connections to Chicago mobster Sam Giancana, who was what? Tied up with RFK. He was a major target of RFK during that time. Heard it talked about by RFK Jr. and Tony Accardo. Ruby regularly traveled to Chicago, New Orleans, and Havana for meetings with known organized crime figures. Documented police reports, reporters' evidence. This isn't coming from me. This is documented evidence. Ruby was photographed with several high-ranking members of the Marcello crime family. Photographed by who? The FBI, local law enforcement, 100%. Multiple witnesses testified to Ruby's role as a courier between crime families. They testified to this, yet the Warren Commission said he had no mob connections. And the mob had nothing to do with the assassination. Ruby just came out of nowhere. Ridiculous. You know how Ruby got into the police department with a gun? Because he was paying off the cops. That's why. You know, in his strip club operations and his gambling operations, he was paying them off. So they allowed him to come in with a gun in the police station and get so close to Harvey as to put a bullet in his stomach. I saw it on national television when it happened. We all saw it. Continue. Financial connections. Ruby received loans from mob-affiliated businesses to maintain his nightclub operations. Financial records show irregular cash flows consistent with money laundering operations. Ruby made multiple calls to known mob associates in the days before shooting Oswald. You hear that? He made multiple calls to known organized crime figures in Chicago, in New Orleans, days before the Oswald killing. And it just so happens he did it out of patriotism, that the guys in the mob were so patriotic that they said, hey, you know, kill Oswald, was so upset that John F. Kennedy was killed. Give me a break. While his brother was cracking down on organized crime, okay, 800% more arrests and convictions as a result of RFK Jr.'s dealings and enforcement against organized crime. Broke the deal he had with Joe Kennedy to back off. RF Kennedy did that. And that's why we got involved. Because Sam Giancana was told, hey, look what he did to you. Look what he's doing to us. 800% more enforcement. We got to get this guy off our back. So yeah, we'll deliver the White House and they'll deliver safety for us. Leave us alone. Go bother somebody else. Makes perfect sense. I don't think RFK Jr. put it together that way. Makes perfect sense. Get him to back off. We'll give you the presidency. Just leave us alone. Ruby's legal defense was partially funded by individuals with mob connections. Now, why would they fund his legal fees if they had nothing to do with it? They didn't want him to talk. Of course they were going to fund his legal fees. And you know what? They knew he had cancer. They knew he wasn't going to make it. And he was he wasn't going to get himself killed, because even in prison, they knew they could have got to him. Ruby just kept his mouth shut. He knew he was going to die, and he was the perfect guy to pull this off, no doubt. I mean, the Oswald killing. Let's keep going. FBI informants consistently reported Ruby as a known associate of multiple organized crime figures. Ruby appeared in over 40 FBI reports related to organized crime activities before the Kennedy assassination. And yet the Warren Commission said that he had no affiliation. It's beyond belief. This government sometimes could be so damn corrupt, it's beyond belief. Local Dallas police classified Ruby's establishments as mob hangouts. In internal documents, Ruby was identified as a person of interest in multiple gambling and vice investigations prior to 1963. What more evidence do you need, people? That Ruby was a mob associate, that Ruby was engaged by his bosses in both New Orleans. Carlos Marcello hated RFK because he went after him, dropped him, deported him out of the country, dropped him in a forest, in the jungle. And Marcello's had to get back. He hated RFK Jr. So why did they help? To get him off their backs. He was going crazy. His whole administration, it was all about going after organized crime. From Hoffa to Sam Giancana to Marcello, he wanted to lock everybody up. So wouldn't it make sense to have a deal to get him off your back? Joe Kennedy, hey, I'll control my son. The president will control my son. Don't worry about it. You won't have any problems anymore. Of course we helped. Why not? So I think it's established through RFK's own words. Couple of things here in this interview. Number one, CIA most likely involved in the JFK assassination. Pretty clear. They came to the mob. Ruby was all mobbed up, had all these connections. The mob had every reason we did to want to get RFK off of our backs because he was coming after us, very, very intensely. And he was disrespecting us, locking people up, going after Hoffa. He wanted to take control of the Teamsters away from us. Well, bad guy. So, of course, we went along with it, 100%. Now, I wanted to say this again. I'm not saying that we started this. We didn't come up and say, okay, we're going to kill the president or we're going to kill RFK. They didn't say that. But when the CIA came to them, ready to jump on board. Absolutely. Get this guy off our back. Leave us alone. We're happy. We'll help you all the way. And by the way, Sam Giancana was caught on tape saying this: we killed the wrong Kennedy, because RFK continued, still went after Hoffa, still went after the mob. Joe Kennedy broke his deal. So he said that we killed the wrong Kennedy. It's on tape. What more do you need? All right, so I hope I put that to bed. And let's see what happens with these classified documents. Let's see if they're real. And I've said this many times on Piers Morgan, on my own podcast. If those documents say that Jack Ruby had no mob affiliation whatsoever, these classified documents, discard them all. It's all baloney. It's all garbage, full of baloney, as I would say. Sammy says that too now. Throw it away, because then they're lying again. They're covering it up. There's no question about it. The government was involved with the mob in the JFK assassination. And I think RFK Jr., with his honest assessment of what he believes went on, he verifies it, no doubt. I want to move on to something very, very briefly. And I don't really know anything about this, so I'm not going to say I have any personal knowledge whatsoever. But again, I want to clear this up. Throughout my lifetime, I heard from prominent people in that life that we were responsible for the Kennedy assassination. No doubt about it. I heard it from my father. I heard it from Persico in conversation with Fat Tony, and general knowledge among the guys. And they don't brag about these things, believe me. I remember one guy saying to me, I don't want to say who he was, hey, we can get to the president if we want to. We did it before. I mean, it was common knowledge. I can say that. I have a question for all my friends and followers. Have you tried my wine yet? In the last 2 years, we've made tremendous progress with Franzese wine, and it's really all thanks to your support, and obviously because people are finding out we have a great wine at a great price. In 2025, we aim to become a national brand, and I want all of you to be a part of it. Every bottle you buy, every story you share builds more than a brand. It fuels a movement. The story of our wine is one of people having second chances and of lives being transformed. That's the truth. So go to my website, franzesewine.com, and get your bottle today. Salud, my friends. Let me move on to something very, very briefly. I want to just touch on it because RFK touched on it in this interview, and this was about the killing of his father, RFK.
I don't believe that Sirhan's bullets ever hit my father.
Okay.
And neither did the coroner, Thomas Noguchi, who's probably the most famous coroner in American history, who did an autopsy that is known as the perfect autopsy.
Very interesting. RFK Jr. doesn't believe Sirhan killed his father. I heard this before, but this is coming out of his mouth in this interview. Very interesting.
My father got shot 4 times from behind. And he hit 8 bullets in his gun. He didn't reload. We know what happened the first 2, and we know what happened to the second 6. We know what happened to every one of those bullets. My father was killed from behind. He was shot 4 times. One of the shots went harmlessly through the shoulder pad of his suit. The other 3 were fatal or potentially fatal. And one of them was right behind his ear. All of them were contact shots. That's what Thomas Noguchi found, meaning the barrel of the gun was either touching his skin or his clothing and was and left a carbon tattoo, or was close enough, within an inch, close enough to leave a carbon tattoo. And the gun was being held at an upward angle.
So he is claiming that there's evidence that all 8 bullets from Sirhan's gun never touched his father. They hit other people. I'm not that aware of this incident. I don't know all the specifics about it, so I can't comment on it. But this is RFK Jr. speaking about his father. I'm sure he did some investigation on it, and this is what he's come up with.
And that man was almost certainly Eugene Thane Cesar, who was a security guard who had been hired the day before. So they already knew when he got the job, he already knew my father was going to be at that hotel. His full-time job was at the Lockheed plant. And before that, he had worked at another defense plant, which was Howard Hughes' company. He had top security classifications at that plant. He self-identifies as a CIA agent. He ended up leaving the country. He was very outspoken against my father. He believed that my father would start a race war, and my father would put blacks in charge of the country, and he hated blacks. And he ended up leaving the country. He died about a year and a half ago in the Philippines.
So what he's saying is that the CIA put this guy up to it. This guy, Eugene Caesar. Wow. I don't know that to be a fact or not. I'm telling you what RFK Jr. believes after his, investigation. I would assume that he looked into this thoroughly.
If I had to prove my case that the CIA murdered my uncle, I'm very confident, just on the evidence that is out there now, that would be very, very easy to prove.
That's powerful coming from RFK Jr. Powerful. The CIA. Let me tell you something, people. Everything in the world is corrupt. There's no question. We have corruption in everything. We have reform in everything, every agency on the face of the earth. The most corrupt agencies or institutions, whatever you want to call them, in the world are governments. Going back to the days prior to the Roman Empire, government, they're always corrupt. They're always in need of reform. They're the biggest agencies around, if you want to call them that, or institutions, or whatever you want to call them. And there's corruption in all of them, in some way, some part. We're seeing it now, right now. In current times, we're seeing the corruption, the fraud, the abuse. We're seeing it. We've witnessed it. We know it. So why is it so far-fetched to believe that a government agency like the CIA, who hated these people, wouldn't be involved in the assassination? And why wouldn't they deal with the mob? They would deal with the devil to get their work done. It's not a stretch at all.
One thing my father told me, people in authority lie. And, part of the duty of living in a democracy is to maintain a posture of constant skepticism toward any aggregation of power.
That couldn't have been better said. I can tell you right now. People in government lie. We see it all the time. We see it more now than ever because we have social media where it's repeated day in and day out, and it's part of history forever. They lie consistently. I've said this. When somebody lies to you once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, you can't believe them or trust them anymore. I've said that consistently. I've said it about our past administration. You can't. This is RFK Jr. saying this. It's amazing, people, what has gone on here. And I hope this was eye-opening for you. So in conclusion, RFK Jr. during this interview, I think he's an honest guy. I think he meant well. I think he was misled in some places, but I actually support everything that he said here, other than the fact that he believes that his grandfather, Joe Kennedy, wasn't involved with the mafia. He absolutely was. I've confirmed that throughout my life with people that I know, and obviously it was documented in the sources that I've given you. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed it. We try to bring you the truth with as much evidence to support it as we possibly can. You got it from me today. That's it. So how do I always leave you, my friends? Same way. Never going to change. Be safe. Be healthy. God bless each and every one of you. And I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. God bless America. Yes, I'll see you next time.